At 74 years old, I stood in the marble foyer of my son's mansion and heard words I thought I would never hear from my own flesh and blood. Dad, don't come to the charity gala tonight. You don't fit the image we're selling. Those words cut deeper than any illness, deeper than any loss I've known in my long life. Imagine being told you're not good enough to stand beside the very people who are standing tall on your sacrifices. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Gerald Whitmore, 74 years old, born and raised in Sacramento. For decades, I built skyscrapers, stadiums, and bridges across California. I was the man in a hard hat at sunrise, and the last man to leave at night, making sure every beam stood straight and every worker went home safe. My hands carried the calluses of a lifetime of labor, but those calluses bought me something precious: security for my only son, Daniel. After my wife Marjorie passed away 12 years ago, Daniel became my reason for breathing. I poured everything I had into making sure his dreams could live on, even if mine had ended with her. When Daniel came to me with an idea for a real estate development firm, his eyes were on fire. He said, "Dad, with your experience and my energy, we can build something that lasts." I wanted to believe in him. And so I did. I sold off parcels of farmland my family had owned in Napa Valley since my grandfather's day. Land that could have set me up comfortably for life. In total, I gave Daniel $1.2 million in seed money. I didn't just hand him a check, I handed him my faith, my trust, and the legacy of generations. I told myself it was worth it. Every dollar I'd ever saved didn't matter as long as my boy had a chance to rise higher than I ever could, and rise he did. Within 6 years, Whitmore Properties was hosting champagne receptions on rooftop penthouses overlooking San Francisco Bay. My son wore Armani suits and drove a black Bentley Continental. He had a wife, Samantha, who decorated herself with diamonds that caught the light in every room. Together they mingled with senators, hedge fund managers, and art patrons. And me, I drove my 10-year-old Lincoln Town car to a 2-bedroom condo on the quieter side of town. I thought it was fine. I had my books, my garden balcony, and the satisfaction of seeing Daniel succeed. I told myself, this is how it should be. Parents sacrifice so their children can fly. But slowly, I started noticing the changes. Daniel would frown when I showed up in my brown leather jacket, the one I've had since the 70s. Samantha would whisper things like, "Maybe Dad could just come to the small family events. He doesn't understand how to handle donors." I brushed it off. I thought, they're young. They're busy. They'll come around. I was wrong. The final blow came that December evening. Their mansion's foyer smelled of imported lilies. The chandelier overhead looked like a cascade of frozen stars. Samantha was dressed in a silver gown, her makeup perfect, her diamonds brighter than the chandelier. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks nervously as he faced me. "Dad, you can't come tonight," he said. "The people we're meeting, they expect a certain polish. It's not personal, it's business. You just don't fit the image. Not personal. Business." Those words were supposed to soften the blow, but they didn't. They felt like stones pressed into my chest. I looked at my son, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders to county fairs, the boy who used to cry into my shirt after his first heartbreak, the boy who held my hand at his mother's funeral. And I thought, This is who I sacrificed everything for. A man who believes his father is a liability. That was the moment something in me hardened. I realized that for years I had been pouring out everything I had, hoping for respect in return. But respect never came. Now let me pause here and say this. If this story hits home for you, if you've ever sacrificed for your children only to feel invisible when they rose on your shoulders, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because I know I'm not alone in this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. You won't want to miss how this story ends. Because what happened after that night at the gala didn't just change my life. It changed my son's life forever. When I drove away from that mansion that December night, the glittering lights of San Francisco felt colder than I had ever known. The city I helped build with my bare hands suddenly seemed like it belonged to someone else, someone richer, younger, and less tired. My son's words kept echoing in my head. You don't fit the image. I gripped the wheel of my old Lincoln so tight my knuckles went white. I wasn't angry yet. No anger would come later. What I felt in that moment was something deeper, a hollowness that pressed into my ribs, the kind of emptiness only betrayal can carve. I parked in front of my modest condo, the one-bedroom place I'd moved into after selling the farmland. As I stepped inside, I noticed the small things that made it mine, the smell of old pine wood from the bookcase. I'd built the faded photograph of Marjorie smiling in front of the Napa vines, the Bible she kept on her nightstand, still resting beside my bed. That night, I pulled that Bible into my lap. The leather cover was cracked, the edges worn from decades of use. I opened to the page where Marjorie had underlined a verse in blue ink, "Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." I stared at those words for a long time. My wife had always believed that Scripture wasn't just a command for children. It was a promise of blessing for families that remembered where they came from. But my son had forgotten. As I sat there, I thought back to the day I signed away those acres of farmland. It was March 2014, a crisp morning with fog rolling low over the valley. I met the buyers at the county office, signed my name, and slid the papers across the desk. My hands trembled not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew I was letting go of land that had been in my family for 3 generations. That night, I went home and prayed. I prayed over that sale, over Daniel's new company, over every dollar that had left my pocket. "Lord, I give this to you," I whispered, kneeling beside Marjorie's old chair. "Let this sacrifice bear fruit. Let my son's future be brighter than mine." And for a while I believed my prayers had been answered. The company grew. Daniel's face appeared in business magazines. Samantha gave speeches at charity luncheons. My name was listed as co-founder emeritus in the early brochures, though it was later quietly dropped. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't in this for recognition. I was in it for love. But sitting there now with Marjorie's Bible in my hands, I realized something. Sacrifice is holy when it's met with gratitude. But sacrifice without gratitude, it becomes something else. It becomes fuel for pride, for entitlement, for forgetting the source of your blessings. I thought about my own body, the surgeries, the years of back-breaking labor, the savings I'd guarded so carefully. I thought about how easily Daniel and Samantha spoke of images and polish, as though I were nothing more than a blemish on their photographs. That night I prayed again. Not the kind of prayer you say before meals or in church pews, a desperate prayer. Lord, give me strength. If I am to be excluded from my own son's life, then at least let me walk with dignity. If they have forgotten the commandments, then remind me who I am. Show me how to stand, even if I stand alone. When I closed the Bible, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. I knew then that my story with Daniel wasn't finished. God had not carried me through 7 decades, through wars, through widowhood, through hard labor, just so I could be silenced by the word image. My son thought I didn't fit his world anymore. Maybe he was right, but I still fit God's world, and that was enough to keep me standing. People often say, betrayal doesn't come all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked roof. Looking back now, I can see the leak began years before that December night. When Daniel first launched Whitmore Properties, he couldn't stop calling me. Every week there was a new idea, a new project, a new risk he wanted to take. I was his sounding board. He'd bring architectural sketches to my condo, spread them across my kitchen table and say, "Dad, what do you think? Would this load-bearing wall hold if we go another story up?" I'd sip my coffee, lean over the blueprints, and give him advice earned from 50 years on construction sites. Those moments made me proud. I thought this is why I sacrificed. So my son could build on the foundation I laid. But as the money began to roll in, the calls became less frequent. When Daniel did call, it wasn't for advice. It was for appearances. "Dad, can you show up at the ribbon cutting tomorrow? Wear a suit. Smile for the cameras." I would. I wore my best navy blazer, the one I'd bought for Marjorie's funeral, and stood beside my son while he cut the ribbon with golden scissors. People clapped. Flashbulbs popped. My name wasn't mentioned in the press release, but I told myself it didn't matter. The first real crack came 2 years later at a board meeting. Daniel had asked me to attend as an honored guest. I sat at the mahogany table listening to men in tailored suits throw around words like leverage equity and exit strategy. When I spoke up about the risks of overextending on luxury condos during a softening market, Samantha gave me a tight smile and said, "That's an old-school perspective. These days it's about brand image, not just brick and mortar." The room laughed politely. Daniel didn't defend me. He just moved on to the next slide. That was the day I realized I was no longer his partner, I was a prop. Then came the lifestyle changes. Samantha insisted on upgrading everything: cars, clothes, even friends. They traded backyard barbecues for rooftop cocktail parties. When I showed up at their house one Sunday in my flannel shirt and jeans, Samantha actually flinched. "Gerald," she said, glancing at my old Lincoln parked in their circular drive, "next time maybe you could Uber here. It just fits better with the neighborhood aesthetic." Neighborhood aesthetic. I laughed then, but it stung. The worst part was the silence. My phone stopped ringing. Holidays became optional. Birthdays forgotten. Instead of Sunday dinners, I got Christmas cards signed Daniel and Samantha Whitmore, with glossy photos of them smiling in Aspen or Paris. No handwritten notes, no calls to say, "Dad, I miss you." But the real root of the betrayal wasn't the distance. It was the paperwork. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the bank. I opened it, expecting it to be an update on my modest savings account. Instead, it was a notice about a loan guarantee, a loan I didn't remember signing for. The number stopped me cold: $2.5 million. According to the letter, I was listed as guarantor. My signature was on the forms, but I had never set foot in that bank. My hands shook as I looked closer. It was my name, but not my pen. Someone had forged it. The realization hit like a hammer. My own son had used my identity, my reputation to secure money for his business. He had turned me into collateral. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at that letter, my heart pounding in my ears. All the sacrifices, the farmland, the money, the years of advice freely given, they weren't enough. Daniel and Samantha hadn't just pushed me out of their world. They had pulled me in as a silent partner in their deceit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, staring at the Bay Bridge lights twinkling in the distance, wondering how my life had come to this. I thought betrayal was being left off a guest list. But no betrayal was when your own child forged your name, gambling with everything you worked for, believing you were too old, too tired, too trusting to notice. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Love without boundaries had turned me into a pawn, and pawns, once pushed far enough, can become something much more dangerous. The next morning, I drove straight to Daniel's office. The headquarters of Whitmore Properties was nothing like the dusty construction trailers I used to work out of. This was a 30-story glass tower downtown, with a lobby full of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a receptionist who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. I gave her my name. She looked startled, then quickly called upstairs. Moments later, Daniel appeared all polished in a three-piece suit, his Rolex flashing under the lights. "Dad," he said too smoothly, "you should have called first." I held up the letter. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" He glanced at it, then sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Look, Dad, it's not a big deal. The bank needed a guarantor, and you were the safest option. It's just paperwork. Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen." My voice rose before I could stop it. "Daniel, this is fraud. That's my name on a loan I never signed." He frowned, lowered his voice. "Dad, keep it down. You don't understand how business works now. Everyone does this. It's leverage, temporary. No, Daniel, it's theft. From me." At that moment, Samantha walked in. She looked me up and down, her perfect smile tight as piano wire. "Gerald, you're making a scene. We've got investors in the conference room." I turned to her. "Did you know about this? Did you know my signature was forged?" Her expression didn't change. Of course I knew. Daniel explained it. "You're his father. Families help each other." "Isn't that what you've always said? Families don't lie to each other?" I snapped. "Families don't treat their father like a checkbook." Daniel grabbed my arm gently but firmly. "Dad, please. You've always said you wanted to see me succeed. Well, this is what it takes. If you can't handle that, maybe it's best you take a step back. Take a step back." That's what they wanted. For me to disappear quietly, carrying their dirty secret while they hosted galas and sipped champagne on my name. I yanked my arm free and looked him in the eyes. "I gave you everything. Money, land, my blessing. But you've crossed a line, Daniel. A line you can't uncross." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. But then he straightened, smoothed his tie, and whispered, "Dad, don't do anything you'll regret." I left the office shaking, but not from weakness, from fury. For the first time in years, I wasn't confused. I wasn't making excuses. I knew exactly what they'd done to me. That night, I sat in my condo and thought about all the sacrifices I had made. The farmland sold for pennies compared to its worth today. The millions poured into his dream. The birthdays and Christmases I spent alone while they entertained senators and CEOs. And then I thought of something else, my dignity. It had been slipping through my fingers, one compromise at a time. But that day, I decided I would no longer compromise. Now let me pause here and speak directly to you who are watching. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very family you sacrificed everything for? If you have, type 1 in the comments. I want to see how many of us share this pain because I know I'm not alone. Daniel and Samantha thought I would stay quiet because of my age. They thought I'd be too tired, too weak, too old-fashioned to fight back. But they forgot something. Old men built the world they're standing on. And some of us still remember how to fight for what's right. The battle hadn't even begun. But I was ready. I didn't sleep much after that confrontation. The letter from the bank sat on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Every time I looked at it, I saw the truth more clearly. My own son had gambled with my name, my reputation, and my legacy. A week later, the phone rang. It was a collections officer from the bank, polite but firm. "Mr. Whitmore, we're reviewing the terms of your guarantee on the Whitmore Properties loan. The business is overextended, and we may need to discuss liability." My heart sank. Liability. Yes, sir. As guarantor, you'd be responsible if the company defaults. The amount is $2.5 million. I hung up slowly, the receiver heavy in my hand. My son hadn't just risked his company, he had risked my entire future. If this loan collapsed, I could lose everything. That night, I drove past their mansion. Cars lined the driveway, Bentleys, Maseratis, Lamborghinis. I sat in my old Lincoln across the street and watched through the lit windows. Samantha floated from guest to guest, sparkling in a red gown. Daniel raised glasses of champagne, his smile perfect, his voice booming. And then, in front of 30 laughing guests, I saw him raise his glass higher and say, "To the image we've built. To the life we've created on our own terms." On our own terms. Not a mention of the farmland sold. Not a mention of the $1 million check. Not a mention of the forged signature. Just a man rewriting history to erase the father who made it possible. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim. That was the moment I felt something colder, sharper resolve. The next morning, I pulled out an old leather box from my closet. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years, land deeds, tax records, sale agreements. Proof that everything Daniel started with had come from me. I tucked the bank letter inside and drove to meet an old friend, Colonel James O'Malley, a man I'd served with in the Army decades ago who had become a respected attorney. James studied the paperwork for nearly an hour, his glasses sliding down his nose. Finally, he looked up. "Gerald, this isn't just unethical. It's criminal. Forgery, fraud, misrepresentation. Can it be proven?" I asked. "Your signature doesn't match. We can get handwriting experts, and the bank keeps surveillance footage of every loan signing. If you weren't there, they'll know." I nodded slowly. My chest was tight, but not with fear, with clarity. James leaned forward. "Gerald, you've got a choice. You can let this go and they'll keep bleeding you dry until you've got nothing left. Or you can fight. But if you fight, understand this, you won't just embarrass your son. You'll destroy his entire facade. His business, his reputation, his marriage, it could all come crashing down." I thought about Marjorie's Bible, about the verse underlined in blue ink. "Honor your father and your mother." My son had broken that commandment in every possible way. And maybe, just maybe, God was giving me the strength to hold him accountable. I looked James in the eye. "File whatever needs filing. And James, don't do it quietly. Do it so loud that when the walls fall, everyone hears. The following week, subpoenas went out. Investigators started digging. The bank froze portions of the company's accounts. Daniel called me, his voice shaking for the first time in years. "Dad, what did you do?" "What you forced me to do," I answered calmly. The cracks widened fast. Investors pulled out. Partners whispered. Samantha stopped posting glittering photos on Instagram. And yet the gala, the one that was supposed to cement their place among the city's elite, was still scheduled at the Four Seasons Hotel ballroom. I made up my mind that would be the night I showed them and everyone else the truth. The image they had built on lies was about to collapse, and I was going to be the one to light the fuse. 3 nights before the gala, I found myself wide awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling. The city outside my window was quiet, the Bay Bridge lights blinking in rhythm with the beating of my tired heart. I was 74 years old. Men my age weren't supposed to be planning battles. We were supposed to be sitting in recliners, sipping tea, waiting for grandkids to visit. But betrayal has a way of dragging the fight out of you even when you thought you had none left. I rose from bed, poured myself a cup of coffee, and pulled Marjorie's Bible from the shelf. The leather felt warm in my hands, familiar like holding hers again. I opened it at random, and my eyes fell on Isaiah 41:10 underlined in her careful handwriting. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." I whispered the verse aloud. My voice cracked, but the words steadied me. For too long I had confused love with silence. I thought giving without boundaries was what a good father did. But God's word reminded me that strength and truth were not enemies of love, they were part of it. If my son couldn't honor me by choice, then he would learn to respect me through consequences. I thought back to the farmland. Rows of vines stretching across Napa, golden under the summer sun. I remembered the day I signed those deeds away, the prayer I whispered over Daniel's future. Back then, I believed I was planting a vineyard in his name. But what had grown instead? Pride, greed, and arrogance. My sacrifice had become his stage to look down on me. That realization didn't fill me with bitterness. It filled me with clarity. So I began to prepare. The next day, I met with James O'Malley again. He slid folders across the table, bank records, handwriting analyses, even video evidence from the branch where Daniel's signature appeared. None of it showed me there. Gerald James said this is airtight. If we bring it to court, Daniel will face charges. Fraud forgery may be worse. I nodded. Then we'll bring it. But first, I want the truth exposed in the room where it will sting the most. James raised an eyebrow. The gala, I smiled faintly. If they care so much about image, let's see how they look when the image shatters. That night, I prayed again. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for strength. Strength to walk into that ballroom full of polished faces and glittering gowns, not as a defeated old man, but as a father who had been wronged and refused to be erased. And somewhere deep inside, I felt Marjorie with me. Her hand on my shoulder, her voice whispering, "Stand tall, Gerald. Don't let them write you out of your own story." The morning of the gala, I stood before my mirror in my best suit, navy wool tailored years ago, but still fitting just fine. My shoes were polished. My tie, a gift from Marjorie on our 30th anniversary, was straight. I wasn't dressing to impress them. I was dressing to remind myself I belonged in any room my son did. That evening, I parked my Lincoln outside the Four Seasons. Valets rushed past me to grab the keys of Maseratis and Bentleys, ignoring my old car. I didn't mind. Inside that ballroom, there would be men and women who thought wealth made them untouchable. Tonight, they would learn that truth could cut deeper than any fortune. As I stepped out of the car, I whispered one last prayer under my breath. Lord, hold me steady. Let me speak with truth, not hatred. Let me show my son that a father's dignity is not for sale. And if I fall tonight, let it be while standing tall. Then I buttoned my jacket, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the golden doors. The gala was about to begin. So was my reckoning. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered like a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast rivers of light across white linen tables, where guests in tuxedos and gowns sipped champagne as if it were water. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their bows dancing like hummingbirds. The air reeked of money perfume that cost more than a month's rent, watches worth more than my Lincoln laughter, polished until it gleamed like silver. I stepped through the doors, and heads turned. Not in admiration, no, in curiosity. They didn't recognize me. I wasn't part of their world. And maybe that was exactly what gave me power tonight. Daniel was at the front of the room, Samantha at his side, both radiant in their element. He wore a midnight black tuxedo with satin lapels, his hair slicked perfectly. She glittered in emerald silk, her diamond earrings catching every shard of light. To the crowd, they looked like royalty. To me, they looked like actors in a play where I was the invisible stagehand. But tonight I wasn't invisible. I walked straight down the aisle between the tables, my steps steady, my chin high. Some people moved their champagne flutes aside as if I might bump them. Samantha's smile froze the moment she saw me. Daniel's eyes widened in alarm. "Dad!" he hissed when I reached him. "What are you doing here?" "What a question," I said calmly, loud enough for the microphones nearby to pick up. "This is a charity gala, isn't it? And what greater charity is there than what I've already given you?" The room went still. Conversations hushed. The quartet faltered bows screeching against strings before trailing off into silence. Samantha stepped forward, her voice sugary but tight. "Gerald, maybe we could step outside." "No," I said, locking eyes with Daniel. "I think the guests deserve to know the truth. After all, you've built your reputation on it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I pulled the folded letter from my inside pocket, the bank notice. The paper looked small in my hand, but it carried the weight of betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning to the audience, "you see before you a successful man. My son Daniel Whitmore. He tells you he built all this by himself, his company, his fortune, his image. But let me set the record straight." Daniel's face flushed crimson. "Dad, stop," but I didn't. I was 74 years old, and for once I wasn't going to be silent. 10 years ago, I continued. I sold the farmland my family had held for generations. I wrote my son a check for $1.2 million. That money started Whitmore Properties. That money was the seed. Without it, there would be no skyscrapers, no penthouses, no galas. Gasps, whispers. Samantha's eyes darted across the crowd, calculating the damage. But it didn't stop there, I said, my voice carrying. Recently, my name was forged on a loan guarantee for $2.5 million. My signature faked. My reputation used as collateral without my consent. My son gambled with my life's work, my security, my dignity. Daniel lunged for the microphone, but I stepped aside, holding it high, like a soldier protecting a flag. "And I want you all to know this isn't just gossip. It's under investigation. The bank, the courts, and my attorneys are involved. When this is finished, the truth will stand taller than any tower Whitmore Properties ever built. The silence was deafening. Guests stared at Daniel, their smiles gone, their eyes sharp. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in as if savoring every word. Daniel stammered, "Dad, you don't understand. This is business. It's complicated." "Business," I thundered. "You call forging your father's name business. You call lying to these people about your empire business. Tell me, Daniel, when you raised your glass and said, 'To the life we built on our own terms.' Did you forget whose blood, whose sweat, whose sacrifice those terms were written on?" A woman in pearls whispered to her husband. Cameras from the press set up to capture the glamour of the night were now aimed squarely at us. The flashbulbs began to pop like gunfire. Samantha grabbed Daniel's arm. "Say something," she hissed, but Daniel's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. He was drowning, and for once I wasn't throwing him a rope. I lowered my voice, calm now, almost gentle. "Son, I prayed for you every night since the day you were born. I gave you more than money. I gave you my faith, my trust, my legacy. And you traded it for image. Well, here's the truth. Daniel, image fades. But truth doesn't." I turned back to the crowd. "You came here tonight to support a cause. Let me suggest a better one: integrity. Because without it, all the money in this room won't buy back the respect you lose when you betray your own family." The room erupted, some with applause, some with shocked gasps, some with hurried whispers, as donors pulled out their checkbooks and tucked them back into their purses. The quartet sat frozen bows, trembling above strings. Daniel's empire hadn't collapsed yet, but the foundation was crumbling right there in front of his friends, his investors, his world. I handed the microphone back to the stunned announcer and walked off the stage. My steps were steady, my head high. For the first time in years, I felt tall again. The reckoning had begun. The moment I stepped off that stage, the entire ballroom seemed to tilt. Not physically, but socially. The balance of power had shifted. The same guests who had toasted Daniel minutes earlier now looked at him as though he were a cracked vase, beautiful once, but no longer trustworthy. I made my way toward the exit, but I didn't rush. Let them watch me leave. Let them see that the old man they thought didn't fit the image was the one holding the truth in his hands. Behind me, the whispers rose into a storm. Did he say forgery? 2.5 million. My God, imagine using your father like that. The press photographers swarmed. I kept walking, ignoring the flashbulbs exploding like fireworks. For once, I wasn't embarrassed by their attention. No, I welcomed it. Because every photograph, every headline would carry the story Daniel had tried so hard to bury. I pushed through the doors into the cool San Francisco night. The air smelled of rain and sea salt, sharp and clean. My Lincoln was parked out front, a humble chariot among the Bentleys and Rolls Royces. I slipped behind the wheel, my hands steady, my heart beating like a war drum. Inside the ballroom, chaos had erupted. I'd barely started the engine when Daniel stormed outside, his tuxedo jacket undone, his tie askew. Samantha followed close behind, her emerald gown dragging across the pavement. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "What the hell have you done?" I rolled down the window. I told the truth. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, investors, politicians. Do you know what you've done to this company? Yes, I said evenly. I've shown them what kind of foundation it's built on, and a house built on lies doesn't stand for long. Samantha's voice cut through the night, sharp and cold. You've ruined us, Gerald. Do you understand? Ruined us. I looked at her, this woman who had once promised to be part of our family, but treated me like an unwanted stain. No, Samantha, I didn't ruin you. Greed ruined you. Pride ruined you. I just stopped covering the cracks. Daniel's hands shook as he ran them through his hair. Dad, you don't get it. We were about to sign a deal with Lancaster Holdings. Multi-million-dollar development. They were ready to invest, and now I interrupted. They know the truth, and maybe that's worth more than all your deals combined. I rolled the window back up and pulled away, leaving them standing under the golden hotel lights, their perfect image unraveling one thread at a time. The next 48 hours were a hurricane. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from reporters, messages from acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years, even a few neighbors who'd seen me on the local news. But the calls that mattered most weren't from strangers. They were from Daniel. Voicemail after voicemail. Dad, please call me back. We can fix this. Dad, you don't understand the damage you've caused. Dad, please, I need your help. Help. The word almost made me laugh. For years I had given him help, money, advice, sacrifices he never acknowledged. And when I finally refused to stay silent, suddenly he remembered I existed. By Monday morning, the fallout was undeniable. Whitmore Properties' top investors had pulled out. The bank issued a public statement confirming that the loan guarantor's signature was under investigation. Local newspapers ran the headline, "Real Estate Heir. Accused of forging father's name in multi-million-dollar loan." The story spread like wildfire. By Tuesday, national outlets were calling. Reporters camped outside Daniel's mansion, cameras rolling as he tried to leave for work. Samantha ducked behind tinted windows, her face pale beneath layers of makeup. For me, though, life stayed the same. I watered my balcony plants. I read the morning paper with my coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in their shadow. I was standing in my own light. That evening, Daniel finally showed up at my condo. He looked 10 years older, dark circles under his eyes, his voice raw. Dad, please, he whispered, almost begging. You can't let this go to court. It'll destroy me. It'll destroy everything. I studied him for a long moment, this man who had once been my little boy. Then I shook my head. Daniel, you destroyed yourself the day you chose image over integrity. Actions have consequences. You're just finally facing yours. He sank onto my couch, burying his face in his hands. Samantha wasn't with him. Maybe she'd already decided her diamond-studded life was worth more than a marriage built on lies. As I stood there watching him, I felt a strange mix of sadness and strength. Sadness for the son I once knew. Strength because for the first time in decades, I wasn't being used. I was being heard. And I knew this was only the beginning. The gala had been the explosion, but the real reckoning was still to come. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper, the kind of place where truth feels heavier than air. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded neatly, the veins on my knuckles raised like ridges of a well-worn map. Across from me, Daniel avoided my gaze. His once perfect hair was disheveled, his suit ill-fitting, now that pride had slipped from his shoulders. Samantha was nowhere to be seen. Word was she had left for New York weeks earlier, her emerald gowns packed away, her ring finger bare. The judge spoke with the calm authority of a man who had heard every excuse, every plea. The evidence of forgery is conclusive. Mr. Gerald Whitmore did not sign the guarantee. Responsibility for the fraudulent document lies with Daniel Whitmore and Associates. The court orders restitution of damages and refers the matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. The gavel fell. 3 sharp knocks that sounded to me like freedom. For the first time in years, I breathed without weight pressing on my chest. My son slumped in his chair, his empire crumbling with a single sentence. Investors had already fled. Projects had stalled. Now the law had put the final nail in the coffin. I didn't smile. This wasn't victory, it was vindication. There's a difference. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved toward me, cameras flashing. Mr. Whitmore, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think your son deserves prison? What's next for you? I paused, choosing my word carefully. I don't celebrate my son's downfall. I mourn the choices that brought him here. But I am grateful that the truth still matters. And as for what's next, I looked past the crowd toward the horizon beyond the courthouse. What's next is peace. 2 months later, I stood on the deck of a small home I'd purchased in Carmel by the sea. The proceeds from my farmland carefully invested, and the settlement from the case had left me with nearly $3.8 million in assets. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to breathe easy. The house was nothing like Daniel's mansion. No chandeliers, no marble foyers, no imported lilies. Just cedar shingles, salt air, and a porch that looked out over the Pacific. The ocean sang against the rocks below, steady, eternal. It reminded me of Marjorie, her laughter, her quiet faith, her way of making simple things feel holy. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in a wicker chair, the Bible resting on my lap. The same verse Marjorie had underlined caught my eye again. Honor your father and your mother. I smiled a sad smile. My son had broken that commandment, yes, but tonight I realized something. I had honored it in my own way. I had honored the generations before me by refusing to let our name be tarnished, by refusing to let greed erase the foundation of integrity we had built. Daniel, I heard, was living in a rented condo now. The Bentley long gone, the company dismantled piece by piece. I knew he blamed me for his downfall. Maybe one day he would see the truth that I hadn't destroyed him. I had only stopped protecting him from himself. Do I still love him? Of course. Love doesn't vanish even under layers of betrayal. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's permission for abuse. And I will never grant that again. One Sunday morning, as I walked along the beach, a young man approached me. He was maybe 30, wearing a faded construction jacket. Mr. Whitmore, he asked. Yes. He shifted awkwardly. I used to work for your son's company. I wanted to say thank you. People know the truth now. A lot of us saw how he treated you and we couldn't say anything. You had the courage to. I knotted my throat tight. Sometimes justice isn't just about money. It's about witnesses finally saying, we saw it too. That night, as the sun sank into the ocean, I whispered a prayer. Not for revenge, not for restitution, but for renewal. Lord, thank you for holding me steady. Thank you for letting me stand tall when I felt so small. And if there's still a path for Daniel, let him walk it. Let him find the man he was meant to be. The waves crashed in response, steady and endless like the heartbeat of the earth. I leaned back in my chair, the breeze cool against my face, and I realized something. I hadn't just reclaimed my money. I had reclaimed my dignity, my story, my life. At 74 years old, I wasn't fading away. I was beginning again. 6 months after the trial, I woke up to the sound of seagulls outside my window. The ocean was calm that morning, a pale silver sheet stretching out to the horizon. Carmel had given me something San Francisco never could piece. I brewed my coffee, sat out on the porch, and opened Marjorie's Bible once more. My hands shook slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. Her underlined verses had guided me through storms darker than this. That morning I found myself staring at Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. I read it aloud, my voice low, almost carried away by the waves. All things, even betrayal, even courtrooms, even the humiliation of being told by your own son that you don't fit the image. Somehow God had worked even those wounds into a purpose, because standing on this porch, I wasn't broken, I was rebuilt. A knock on my door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Daniel stood there. He wasn't the polished man from the galas anymore. His suit was gone, replaced by a simple shirt and slacks. No Rolex on his wrist. His hair a little too long, his eyes tired. "Dad," he said quietly. I didn't answer at first. I just looked at him waiting. I lost everything he whispered. The company, Samantha, the house. Everyone's gone, and it's my fault. I know that now. His voice cracked. I treated you like a burden when you were the one who built me up. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. For a long time I said nothing. My heart ached not because of anger, but because this was the son I remembered buried beneath years of pride. Finally, I nodded toward the porch. "Sit down. Have some coffee. We'll start with honesty. That's something we never had before." He sat. And for the first time in years, we talked. Not about money, not about image, about truth, about family, about faith. I didn't tell him I forgave him that morning. Forgiveness isn't a lightning strike, it's a sunrise. It begins in darkness and grows brighter one honest moment at a time. But I let him stay. And maybe that was the beginning of something new. Later that night, as the sky turned gold and crimson, I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. I had lost illusions, yes. The illusion that love without boundaries is love. The illusion that money buys respect. The illusion that silence protects family. But I had gained something far greater: dignity, peace, and the chance to begin again at 74. And as strange as it sounds, I was grateful. Because sometimes the hardest storms clear the sky for the brightest dawns. Now let me ask you something, from one human being to another. Have you ever had to set boundaries with ungrateful family? Have you ever reached the point where you realized love doesn't mean letting yourself be used? If you have, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because your voice matters. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. There are more stories like mine, stories of faith, betrayal, and redemption that I promise you won't want to miss. As I closed my Bible and watched the last rays of sunlight melt into the Pacific, I whispered one last prayer. Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength to stand tall when others tried to make me small. Thank you for reminding me that dignity doesn't fade with age. And thank you for showing me that even at 74, it's never too late to begin again. The waves roared in answer, steady and eternal. And I knew deep in my bones my story wasn't one of loss. It was one of renewal. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance we leave behind isn't money or houses. It's the lesson that respect is not optional, that faith carries us through the darkest valleys, and that every ending can be a beginning if we choose to rise.